A mezcal distilled with apples, pears, and Creole turkey breast. Another distilled with chicken and mole. And a vegetarian-friendly option distilled with fresh mandarin peels and marigold flower petals. These are all in their own way Mezcal De Pechugas, which translates in Spanish literally to poultry breast mezcal. This is a distillation tradition that's been cooking up in the state of Oaxaca, Mexico since many believe as early as the 1940s. And though it's since made its way to the United States in some somewhat gimmicky forms, this is in all means a very traditional way of making mezcal that's often tied to seasonal harvests and the personal preferences of distillers using whatever they have in their neighborhood. Now, if you do manage to find these in the United States, the prices do tend to skew towards the more expensive side, but the flavors are more often than not absolutely worth it for an adventurous drinker. Let's talk about it. So, unlike tequila, mezcal can be made with some 30 to 40 different types of agave varietals. Oftentimes in the state of Oaxaca, which is home to, I believe, 80 to 90% of the commercially available mezcal we have here in the United States. For the purposes of a Mezcal De Pechuga, it doesn't really matter which type of agave they use, but rather how they distill it after the fact. So, in the most famous version of this technique, distillers will literally hang a string above the still, wrapped around a dangling piece of protein. Most often a raw turkey breast or a raw chicken breast. They'll usually hang it above the still between the first and second rounds of distillation. And as the vapors rise into the air, the protein will start dripping juices down below, and it sort of commingles into the batch for a sweet and savory blend of flavors. Now, that big dangling chunk of meat tends to get a lot of the attention, but oftentimes distillers will also add fresh fruits, produce, and grains directly into the still as well for an added blast of local flavor. The possibilities are limitless and have frankly gotten kind of absurd as this technique has been popularized with more drinkers. I've tried Mezcal De Pechugas distilled with rabbit and one from Del Maguey that actually made use of Iberico ham. I know Paquera recently rolled out one that used Wagyu beef and another one that used fresh mangoes. And one that I'm always sure to tell my friends and family about was this mezcal from 2023. It was a collaboration between Kaya and Otto's High Dive, two Michelin recommended restaurants down in Orlando, Florida. They went down to Mexico to create a Florida-inspired mezcal. And I am not making this up, but they distilled something with alligator, coconuts, plantains, and bay leaves. Sadly, I did not have a chance to try this myself, but I had a colleague based down in Florida who did have a chance to try it. She said it was delicious, and they even served it up alongside mini-sized bites of octopus and alligator. So make of that what you will. Today, I'm gonna take a look at Mezcal De Pechuga through 3 different bottlings that approach the technique in vastly different ways. First off, we've got Del Maguey Single Village Mezcal Pechuga con Mole. There's a few things fresh off the bat that make this different from the other bottlings and also a little bit trickier to explain. This is a limited edition batch that the brand distilled in honor of its 30th anniversary earlier this year. Emphasis on the limited edition. According to the scribbles on the side, this being bottle 440 out of 800. It wasn't officially released to market, and there aren't a whole lot of details to know about it other than what's written on the label. It was bottled at 47% ABV, distilled from a mix of agave papalote and pizora, and the Mezcal De Pechuga part comes by way of chicken breast and mole, which would add a sort of chocolatey flavor, at least in theory. I think the biggest thing of note is that it doesn't really taste like chicken, or at least not like chicken fresh out the grill or fresh out the oven or something like that. A lot of Mezcal De Pechugas have this extra silky mouthfeel that I believe is added from those savory protein elements, but otherwise, the main flavors that you're usually going to get are going to be the agave and then whatever fruits, veggies, or grains were added directly to the still between the first and second round. I get a lot of underripe fruit on the nose from this, particularly green mango, and then on the palate, sort of a chalky ground cocoa nib vibe mixed with a lot of tilled earth and some smoke. It might seem like kind of an obvious comparison, but it really does taste like an entree, and it lingers on the finish for ages and ages with tons of flavors that you don't really get from a conventional mezcal. For a different twist on the concept, we can look at Convite Pechuga Mezcal. This is bottled at 42% ABV using Espadin agaves, and the Mezcal de Pechuga aspect was added by way of Creole turkey breast, apples, pears, pineapples, and tejocotes, which is kind of like a sweet and sour Mexican apricot. So far as Mezcal de Pechugas go, this one is relatively cheap and widely available, clocking in at around $75 most places spirits are sold. I first opened this one up about a month ago, and the reason I keep coming back to it isn't because any of the flavors I just listed out, but because It has a really strong eucalyptus, mint, cardamom vibe, which I know might kind of sound like I'm pulling words out of my ass, but the flavor really is strong enough that I'm convinced those ingredients, or some combination of those ingredients, were added into the still. It has this icy cooling note that coats the nose and the back of the throat. I'd compare it to menthol or maybe Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap. If you've ever used that, I think you know exactly what I mean. And to be clear, I mean all of that in a good way. This is a super unique flavor profile that I was definitely not expecting from the product description, but in practice, it's a really good sort of after dinner treat, kind of like a Fernet Branca or some other kind of Italian Amaro. It's not vegetarian, but the overall vibe definitely leans into those vegetable and herb influences. I think for the best. Last but not least, we've got Bozal Kempasucho, one of my favorite bottlings I've gotten in the mail over the past couple of weeks. This is a seasonal batch that the brand rolls out every year around Dia de los Muertos, late October, early November, and it makes use of marigold flowers and orange peels added directly to the still. To be clear, there is no meat used in the process, and the brand doesn't use the word Mezcal De Pechuga in any of the promo materials, but I have seen people online call this a vegan pechuga, so I figured I might as well add it to the topic. I was talking before about how the ingredients added during distillation don't always come through in the final product, at least not super clearly, but that is definitely not the case for this one. Straight out the bottle, this is the mirror image of a orange liqueur, at least on the nose. I get a ton of citrus notes, lots of florality, and a sweet and sour undercurrent that I would liken to Sour Patch Kids. And the palate has all of the same. I get a mix of lemon, lime, grapefruit, and orange, a little bit of lavender, and a slightly savory note lingering underneath, halfway between pumpkin and maybe squash. This bottling was definitely distilled and released as somewhat of a collector's item, costing around $130 every time they drop it, but I think what's interesting is that it really has a flavor profile that I would recommend to just about anybody, regardless of whether they're a mezcal skeptic or a mezcal nerd. It's distilled from Espadín agaves in Oaxaca and is bottled at 47% ABV, but it absolutely does not taste like this. It's super smooth, easygoing, and luxuriously sweet on the finish. Now, the Mezcal De Pechuga category is pretty vast, so these three bottlings should be seen less as a representation and more as a couple of examples that could go in pretty much any direction. If you have any recommendations, be sure to drop them in the comments. I'm always looking for new Mezcal De Pechuga bottlings, and even if they're a little harder to find, I'm down to do the search. Be sure to like and subscribe to the Tequila Pour for all things Mexican spirits.